question everything. Our relationships, our jobs, what constitutes an office, and who we are. In a world filled with chaos, confusion, and uncertainty, it's time for some clarity. It's time to start understanding one another. It's time to start understanding ourselves. We envision a world where everyone knows their why. But even more, we envision a world where everyone knows their WHY.os. Their why, their how, and their what. The operating system that drives you, that lets the world know where you stand, what your unique gift is, and most importantly, who you are. WHY.os. Are you ready?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Why Not Wednesday, our weekly show where we talk to amazing coaches, consultants, and individuals who are either coaches in the Y Institute or friends of the Y Institute who have had an experience with their WHY.os that we want to talk about. We're going to ask them the question, what is your biggest why not moment? So today we have on the show Vanessa Judelman, who is the president of Mosaic People Development. For over 20 years, Vanessa has been helping clients to develop leaders who inspire great results. She is a speaker, a facilitator, a talent management consultant, and a certified coach. She has been a consultant and has worked in-house as a business leader. So combining that experience, she designs and delivers programs that are practical, customized, and can be applied on the job immediately. Welcome to Why Not Wednesday, Vanessa. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Excited to share you and your talents with Y Nation. It's been, it's been a short time since we met. And, one of the first questions we're going to ask on this show is, how did learning your WHY.os feel to you? Because you've done so much and you've been a coach for a long time. You've been a leadership trainer, but this is something new. And we were introduced by Noemi. So thank you. Shout out to Noemi for introducing us. But she's your podcast scheduler. And I'm so glad she introduced us, because when I learned about the work that you do, I was really intrigued and I couldn't wait to share your talents with our crew. Your why is to contribute to the success of others, make a difference. Your how is to simplify, make things simple and easy to understand. So it's how you contribute by making things simple and easy to understand and implement. And it's even in the intro that we talked about. And your what is trust. What people can count on you is that you can be trusted to do what you say you're going to do. How did that feel to you, Vanessa, when you first heard it?
I have to say it resonated a lot. I was actually quite surprised because I've never done an assessment. I've done lots of assessments around work style and personality and temperament. But what I love about this tool, which is so different, is that it focuses on how you operate. And it resonated a lot. I have to say, a lot of people in our line of work are there because they do want to make a difference. And that's why I'm driven to do the work I do, is really to bring light to the corporate world. I mean, I believe as a leadership consultant and coach that leaders set the tone. They are the glue that holds an organization together. And I've had experiences over my career where I've had terrible leaders, and I'm sure people listening have as well. And so we know, like the research indicates, that people leave managers, they don't leave organizations. And so that's why my work of helping leaders to really understand their role, because it's very different. A lot of people around my why around contribute is so meaningful to me, because a lot of leaders get promoted into leadership positions without really any training or development, right? And I always use the analogy of a car, teaching a 16-year-old to drive a car, right? You don't just say to them, here's your car keys, now go ahead and drive, right? You take them to driver's ed class and you give them, they take online lessons, and it's a whole process. but why do we just throw leaders into the deep end and say, lead, right? And so that's why I really love that first piece for me around contribute, because that's a contribution I'm here to provide to the world, is to really help leaders know what it takes to lead, give them the tools, and also increase their confidence so they can really do a good job.
That definitely comes across in your mission. We're going to get into that a little bit, but I want to comment on that with regards to leaders. It is so true. I came from a corporate environment where we took our best salespeople. I've always been in sales. We took our best salespeople and then we made them managers. Because if you're a good salesman, you must be a good manager, right? Or you're a good technician, right? Or you're a good customer service rep. The best people get promoted into leadership positions, but you're absolutely right. There's a void in terms of leadership training, and that's where you come in. You provide leadership training, you provide team building, coaching, organizational development, change management. What's the area that you love the most out of all those things that you do? What's the one area where you say, man, I can't wait to do that part with the next client I'm working with?
It's a good question. I've worked in consulting for 25 years, so there's a lot of things that I can do. And I always lead with leadership, because like the nuts and bolts of leadership. So that's literally rolling up my sleeves and working with groups of leaders. Some of them, when they start working with me, have had some training before, and some of them have really never done any kind of leadership training. So I take them through sort of a process with 3 pillars. So interesting, because I'm gonna dive into simplify, which is my how. And I was so blown away by simplify being my how, because that's what I do when I work with leaders. Leadership is really, really complex. It's multifaceted. And a lot of leaders kind of fall into what I call the web of leadership, where they're just overwhelmed and sucked in by the complexity of leadership. So I simplify for them. And the way I do that is I share the 3 pillars of leadership success. So the first pillar as a leader, you have to know yourself. That's that whole self-awareness piece. The second pillar is manage your team. You've got to know how to coach your people. You've got to know how to develop them, give feedback. And then the last pillar is lead your business. And that's all about executing strategically and leading and managing change, and even things like prioritization and delegation. So that's really what I love to do, Dan. I love to take the complexity of leadership and really simplify it for leaders, and then give them practical tools that they can implement on the job to help them lead effectively.
And true to a how of simplify, it's 3 things. It's not 10 things. It's not 12 things or 25 things. It's 3 things. So the 3 pillars are know yourself. So self-awareness is so important, which we love talking about. Managing yourself, and then leading your business. So 3 things, and I'm sure there's sub things under that, but that's really simple. I mean, here's 3 things you need to do to be successful as a leader: know yourself, manage your team, and then lead your business. I love that. So one of the things we talked about in the pre-show, Vanessa, that I wanted to ask you about is your mission. Your mission is to provide leaders with the skills, tools, and confidence to lead with impact. Where does that mission come from, and how do you bring it to life?
So where it comes from is actually a really bad experience that I had. So I was working in consulting for many years, and then I moved in-house, and I was running a team, and I had a great team and a great leader. And I went on my second maternity leave. And while I was on my maternity leave, a new leader joined the organization, and she was my new boss. And it was an absolute nightmare. She would yell at me in front of people. She criticized me in front of people. She took away all my responsibilities. And in fact, I moved from being like a very high performing individual in that organization to someone who was really disengaged within about 4 or 5 months of coming back from my maternity leave. So I had okay leaders before, and I had amazing leaders before, but I'd never had a terrible leader that really impacted my self-esteem. And so while it was really hard at the time to go through that experience, I'm so glad I had it, because now it really solidified my passion to give leaders the tools they need to nurture their team, to grow their team, to develop their team. Because you as a leader, and I always tell leaders when I start working with them, you as a leader make or break people's experiences at work, just like this leader did for me. I left an amazing organization that I loved because of this leader. So that's why this work is so meaningful to me. It's really, as for many people who start their own business, based on a personal experience that I had.
And you brought that up earlier. You talked about people don't leave organizations. Usually organizations are amazing and they have great missions and they're doing great things. They leave their immediate leader after a bad experience. What if we went back, Vanessa? What if you could coach that leader today? What if that leader came to you? What would you be able to help her with that would have made your experience better?
So I'm actually going to go to my what. My what is trust. And what this leader did not do is build trust with her team. I love I don't know if you're familiar, there's an amazing book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. And Stephen M. R. Covey is the son of Stephen Covey, who wrote the amazing book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And what he does so brilliantly in this book is he breaks down trust into 2 components. That to have high trust relationships, you have to have character and competence. So the character side is things like I'm respectful and I'm transparent and I'm loyal. The competence side is things like I get results, I get better, I have those crucial conversations with people, I'm accountable to others. And then there's 3 that are character and competence, which is listening, which is keeping my commitments. I mean, if you don't keep your commitments, you automatically lose trust. And then the third one that's both character and competence is I extend trust. So I purposely create an environment that is high trust. And so what this leader did, which is very interesting, she was very high on the competence side. So she delivered amazing results, but she was very low on the character side. She was very disrespectful for people. She was very disloyal. She sort of would have conversations about you behind your back to other people. And of course, I'd been at the organization a long time. And so people would just tell me what she said. So that's really the key thing. And I like to start there with leaders. I like to start with, what does it mean for you to develop trust? Because if you have trust as a foundation, you can build a high-performing team. Trust as a foundation, you as a leader will never create a high-performing team. You'll just never get there.
That makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for sharing that. And let's get us both on here together. Here we go. Here, I told you I was going to play with it and I might make a mistake or two. So I was playing with our solo layout. But Vanessa, that makes so much sense. And trust is such an important component. So for you, has trust always been a big part of everything that you do?
You know which part of trust has? I got to say, because trust is all like those 13 behaviors that I just mentioned. The one that has always been part of my DNA is keep commitments. If I say to somebody, I'm going to show up at 5 p.m., I'm going to be there at 4:59. If I say to someone, I'm going to deliver that proposal to you Friday at noon, it'll be there Friday at 11, right? And so that's part of my DNA, but it's not a part of a lot of people's DNA. Maybe it's, Dan, it's part of my simplify piece. Maybe, I don't know, you can tell me a little bit about that. If sort of keeping commitments is part of that brain that likes to simplify. Right. But that's one of the key ways to build trust as an entrepreneur with my clients. I mean, can you imagine as an entrepreneur not keeping your commitments to your clients? You know, many people say, how have you run a successful business for almost 12 years? I think keeping commitments is a big part of that.
Do what you say you're going to do. And that is so important to people with trust in their top 3. And it's simple, right? In terms of keeping it simple, if you know that if Dan said he's going to do something, that it's done and you can check it off, that's simple. But if you have to follow up with him and remind him or check that he actually did it, that's not simple. And that's no fun for you, right? And so the other part, as you were describing that manager experience, trust being in your top 3, I can imagine that became an environment where you could almost not exist there.
Yeah, I think, yeah, in terms of, it's a great point. In terms of motivation, different people are motivated by different things at work. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. For me, it's very motivating to be in an environment that's high trust. I mean, I don't know anyone who can work in an environment that's low trust. I know many people who stay in environments that are low trust
Mhm.
because better the devil you know, right? I think
Right.
people feel like they're stuck in a workplace that's not healthy for them, but you're never stuck. It's mindset, right? That's that first pillar of know yourself. I also talk to leaders about mindset and having a growth mindset and realizing sometimes when you feel you're stuck, it's just a story you're telling yourself. You're not really stuck. You can choose to stay there and that's your choice and that's fine, or you can choose to leave and find a new role or find a new job or move within the organization, and that's your choice as well.
Yeah, that's so important. I think understanding who you are. So you start with self-awareness. Now you also have a book called Mastering Leadership: What It Takes to Lead in Today's Fast-Paced World. So as I looked into the book, I like that you know, again, maybe it's the simplify. You talk about finishing versus perfectionism, courage versus fear, team versus independence, and ambition versus competition. Um, Tell me about the book. What is the big lesson? Why did you write the book, and what is it that you're trying to get to the world through it?
So I wrote the book because I see so many leaders struggle.
Mhm.
And I know that, most of my clients or organization pays for me to support them, and not everybody can afford that. So I really wanted to democratize the process of giving people, everybody, if you've got 20 bucks, you can learn a lot about leadership by reading my book. And I had so many experiences that I just wanted to share with people. And I blog once a week. If anyone's interested, go on my website, just Google Mosaic People Development. I blog literally every single Friday, and I've been doing it consistently for 5 years. And that's free leadership resources that you can tap into immediately. And so I wrote the book because I wanted to provide people with a tool and tools to develop as a leader. I wanted to really explain what my philosophy is around leadership. A lot of people at the time were talking about human capital and
Yeah.
words like that. I can't stand that term, human capital. Why would you refer to people as human capital? Just call them people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I needed to get my philosophy and some of my thoughts about leadership out there, Dan. That would be one example. Another example is a term which I can't stand, which is when you say that imposter syndrome, right?
Mhm.
It's talked about so much, and none of us are imposters, nor do we have a syndrome, right? And so I talk about that. Imposter syndrome is merely when people take on a new opportunity, they have development gaps. Again, let me give the example of someone being promoted. You were promoted into a new position and you feel imposter syndrome. No, you have to stop using that term. Rather, what you need to do is say, okay, what are the gaps between, let's say you move from a director to a VP? What was I really competent at as a director? And what are the gaps that I need to focus on in this new VP role? In fact, I have a client who's in a director position right now that I'm coaching one-on-one, and she's moving into a VP role. Her goal is to move into a VP role next year. So one of the gaps that she has is executing strategically. And so we've identified that as a gap, and that's what we're focusing on during coaching. So no more imposter, you don't have a syndrome. Let's just look at what gaps you need to close in your development.
Love it. Love it. Well, you had some lessons learned from writing your book. When I went into Mosaic People Development, and I know we had the link up, so if you're interested, you can go there. But tell us about finishing. So there's some 4 lessons learned that I want to talk about. Finishing versus perfectionism. Tell us about that.
So I see a lot of leaders who are perfectionists, and I personally am a recovered perfectionist, I have to admit, and that's why this one is very near and dear to my heart. So in the past, if I made a mistake, I would beat myself up and I would ruminate on it for weeks and just drive myself crazy. And then I learned that you have to ship. At some point, you have to ship. And so, first of all, growth. Another wonderful book that I love is Carol Dweck's book. Her name is Carol Dweck, Dweck. Her book is called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success, and she talks about fixed and growth mindset. So when I read her book, it was a game changer because I learned that fixed mindset, you believe things are set in stone. Growth mindset, you believe nothing's set in stone. With hard work, you can improve. And that's why this book is compulsory reading for all of my clients, because you have to come to leadership with a growth mindset. So for me, that perfectionism is about, I am wrong. This skill is set in stone, which is completely not true. The growth mindset and moving from perfectionism to finishing is nothing set in stone. So I have to know that this, let's say I'm working on a proposal for a client, right? I have a colleague, for example, we were in the same job for 5 years. I would finish work at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and off I'd go on my merry way. And she would finish work at, say, 9 p.m. and we had the same job. Why? Because she was a perfectionist. She would change the font and the color of the font. And it gets to a point where your client doesn't care whether it's this font or that font, or the font is black and blue, right? So that's really the piece around finishing versus perfection. You have to know when you're 80% there. And I want you to ask yourself this question. If you're a perfectionist, ask yourself, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Right? And that's the time to shift and to finish, rather than driving yourself crazy and focusing on it to be perfect. Because the reality is, none of us are perfect. Why? We're human. So you will never be perfect. So it's an unrealistic expectation to put on yourself.
Yeah, I love that. You have some resources that you have that are related to your what of trust, Vanessa. So let's talk about some of those resources and how could people access them, or is that something that people get when they're working with you?
For sure. Yeah. I have a trust assessment that I use with people to identify what areas they're doing well in terms of building a high trust team, and where some of their gaps are. Also on my website, I've got lots of resources. You can also go to, if you want one place, what I would recommend is yourleadershipresources.com. If you go to yourleadershipresources.com, I've put up a quiz that you can do that's free, a link to some of my favorite podcasts, a link to some of my favorite blogs. And it's sort of a one-stop shop for some free resources that are related to leadership. And that's probably the first place I'd recommend people go is to yourleadershipresources.com.
Perfect. And let me ask you this, because this is a cool question. Where does the name Mosaic come from? Because that's such a cool name, but what does it mean? Mosaic People Development.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about naming my business, which is really hard to do, if you've ever named anything, it's really, really hard to do. I was thinking about a word that really represented people, businesses, and organizations and teams. The word mosaic popped to mind because if you think about it, we as individuals are unique. We're mosaics built of many different strengths and weaknesses, and we all have different values. And then as teams, our teams are mosaics of different people. Our teams are based on people, again, with different work styles and different values and different strengths and different weaknesses. And then organizations are sort of a mosaic of different teams who all have different functionalities. And so mosaic was really that beautiful image that encapsulated that sense for me.
I am so glad I asked that question, because I really like the picture you paint of all the different colors and all the different people, because really organizations are complex and mosaics are complex, right? When you stand back, you can just see the image. But when you get closer, you start seeing all the details. And I think that's a lot of the work that you do as a consultant, as a coach, as a leadership expert. Let's talk a little bit about your, I saw that your goal, right? Your goal is to develop great leaders at all levels. And you got 3 steps: coaching individual leaders to grow leaps and bounds in a short period of time. The next one's really key: training new managers to successfully transition into a leadership role. And then providing senior leaders with the necessary tools to align their people with their business strategy. Let's talk about that first one: coaching individual leaders to grow leaps and bounds in a short period of time. Give us the simple, right? Give us, how do you do that?
Okay. How do you do that? I do that by setting goals. If I'm a person who simplifies, Dan, I'm going to set goals with people, right? So when I start coaching an individual, we set 3 goals. Again, back to the rule of 3s, right? Everything I do is the rule of 3s. And that's because people remember things that are in 3s. So When I work with a client, we set 3 goals, and then we meet for an hour every couple of weeks, and we go back to those goals and we talk about strategies to implement the goals, to achieve the goals. We talk about tools. I provide all of the people that I coach with a toolkit. I call it their leadership toolkit of tools. Let me give you an example of what a goal could be for coaching. It could be something like, I know that a lot of leaders tend to avoid giving feedback. And so one goal could be around not avoiding crucial conversations anymore and really learning how to manage conflict and give tough feedback. So that's an example of what a goal could be. A goal could be something like really communicate around communication skills and really learning how to communicate to different work styles, because some of us in the way we communicate are very direct. Some of us are very indirect in the way we communicate. Some of us tend to be a little more assertive in our communication style. Some of us tend to be a little quieter, maybe even a little more passive in the way we communicate. And so that's what we need to learn is, what is my style around communication and how do I need to change or adjust that to meet the needs of others? So for example, if I'm someone who's super direct, which I am, sometimes if you think about it this way, Dan, and I know in your operating system, you probably think about this too. Sometimes our strengths, when we overuse them, actually become our weaknesses. So if I think about my communication style, this is the kind of conversation I would have with a coaching client. I may say to them, okay, you're someone who's very direct. What's good about being direct? Well, what's good about being direct? Well, people know what I'm thinking and feeling, and I'm just very upfront about that, which is amazing. And then I might say to them, okay, what happens when you overuse your directness so it becomes a weakness? And they may say something like, well, sometimes people find I can be a little bit rude because I'm just too direct. And so then we'll talk about a strategy of, okay, well, what can you do to kind of dial that down? And listen, if 2 direct people are talking to each other, no problem. But if you have someone who's kind of on your team is a little more soft-spoken, you may want to tone it down a little bit. So that would be an example of a goal that we would focus on together.
And it's such an important goal because you're talking about those difficult conversations, crucial conversations, or critical conversations that people need to have. And if you're avoiding those, that's a tough thing to work with, not just for the leader, but also for the people working with them. If they're not getting that feedback, they can't improve, right? So I love that as a goal. How about training new managers to successfully transition into a leadership role? We talked about that deficit of leadership training.
Mm-hmm.
So you train new managers to successfully transition. What are a couple of key things that you work with them on?
So I work with new managers for 8 months. I rarely do things like boot camps because I don't believe they work. I've been developing leaders for 20 years. And I don't like taking leaders to an offsite for 2 days and saying, here's leadership, 2 days, go for it. No, when I'm working with new leaders, we work together for 8 months. I'll work with maybe a group of like 15 to 20 leaders, and we'll meet for a couple hours a month, and we'll focus on one part of learning, one part of leadership. Let's say it's coaching. And then they have a whole month to apply all the coaching tools that we talked about in the session. Then we'll move on to another topic. Let's say it's how to build a high-performing team. And then they'll do a mini assessment in 2 hours we're together. And then they'll go off and they'll practice the tools. Everyone has homework. That's how you develop new leaders. You can't just, say read a book or go to a 2-day offsite. It takes time to develop leadership skills, as I mentioned before, because they are complex. So that's why we meet for 1 month. We focus on one part of leadership. We practice it. We come back. We debrief. We look at what worked, what didn't. People debrief their partner, their learning with a partner to get input from their partner on what they did. And so we really look at the philosophy around the homework is not, did I do it perfectly? The philosophy is really, what did I learn from that? And what will I do differently next time? So that's really the approach that I leverage, because when I work with new leaders, there's so much to learn. I really want sustainable behavioral change with them. And so that's why we work together for at least 8 months.
What I really like about that is, it's a 2-day offsite, 16 hours, or 2 hours a month for 8 months, still 16 hours, but that homework and coming back and learning and applying, because if you do that 2-day offsite and you're gone, there's nobody to ask questions from. Hey, this didn't work. And it's all thrown at you so quickly. So I like the way you break it down into 8 months. We're going to still do 16 hours. We're just going to do it a little bit differently. And it's going to be a lot easier to implement, which again, a lot simpler to implement one idea and start getting yourself ready for the next session, and you actually implement stuff. We're running out of time. We've got to ask the big question, Vanessa. Tell us about a time in your life. The name of the show is Why Not Wednesday. So we always ask the question, tell us a time in your life when you said why not to something and you're so glad that you did.
Well, I have a little bit of a twist. I was thinking a lot about that question, and my twist is, when I reached a certain age, I kind of said to myself, I need to live my life by not pleasing other people all the time, or pleasing other people constantly, at the risk of being stressed out and overwhelmed myself. So I have this philosophy, which is kind of like why not, but it's hell yes and hell no. And so every time somebody asks me to do something, it's a hell yes or a hell no. And so let me give you an example. If somebody says, I'm going to a concert this weekend and it's a 2-hour drive. Would you like to come? And I don't like the person. Maybe it's the kind of music I don't like. And I don't want to sit in a car for 2 hours in the middle of the summer. I'd rather be outside hiking in nature. I'll say, thank you so much for the invite. But no, thank you. It's not going to work for me. Right. And so that's the philosophy that I use now is hell yes or hell no. And it's just so empowering.
If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. I love that, Vanessa Judelman. You've just given us a great tool that we can use. And that example, boy, sitting in a car with someone you don't like for 4 hours because you got to get there and you got to get back.
Or even someone you do like. Even so, it can be someone I love. It's just not what I like to do in the summer.
Not what you want to do. Well, what do you say we end on that note? That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thank you so much. Pleasure chatting with you today.
It has been great to have you on Why Not Wednesday. We want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your story of your success. If someone wants to work with Vanessa, what's the best way to do it?
Go to www.mosaicpd.com.
Fantastic. So we've got your website up on the screen. If you want to reach out to Vanessa, she's on LinkedIn also. She's connected to me. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and we'll see you next week on Why Not Wednesday. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thanks so much.